it's an honor to introduce our next speaker. He's a past president and a teacher. Eric Woodroof came to Jordan about 10 years ago with Barney Cape Hart, and we started our transformation into energy management. They changed lives. Now we have 509 people certified and over 1,400 people trained during the past 10 years. It's an honor to introduce Eric. Eric is passionate about saving energy and helping our environment. He provides insight on practical, guaranteed ways to do energy management. He believes in economics and energy. By providing seminars, keynote speeches around all over the world, these ideas help his clients to improve profits while also helping the planet. He has received the Department of Energy awards and is the youngest member ever to be inducted into the Energy Manager Hall of Fame by AEE, and he is also into the College of Engineering Hall of Fame at Oklahoma State University. He is also a recipient of the Lohmann Medal, which is the college highest honor for contribution to the field of energy. And he is also a past president of AEE. Let's welcome Eric.
Well, I apologize. You were supposed to get Christine Figueroas, but you got me, so I'm pinch hitting today. But I really want to acknowledge Jordan's efforts and Samer's efforts. They've done wonderful things in Jordan, and I really enjoyed Peggy's talk, which to me I interpreted as kind of an open challenge to us all, not just our own country, but you know, I've been going to China for the last 10 years and probably 25 times, and I've seen a lot of the things she's talked about. And so I'd really interpret it as a challenge for us to do better, but more of a friendly competition, okay? And I think that what I'm going to do today is build on that. This is a keynote I'm supposed to give next month, and so I was able to work with it this morning. But we're going to talk about some global trends and build on what Peggy said, but also talk about opportunities, particularly for energy managers that I'm hoping there are a lot of them in this room. So we got about 30, 40 minutes, and I'm just going to jump right into it. I've been actually quite excited that there's a lot of new people in AEE, younger people that don't really know a lot of us older folks, but as Samer said, I've got some publications, I've got some clients, it doesn't really matter, but we're all really passionate about what we do. And in the passion that I've had about 20 years, I've written about 100 publications, and I want to share with you right off the bat a couple of them that I think are kind of useful to you. In that 20 years ago or so, we actually did some research and proved by looking at stock prices that firms that do energy management projects like McDonald's or companies like that, when they make a big announcement in a newspaper, their stock price went up 21% above the market within 150 days because shareholders recognize this as a good investment. So that was one study, and that was a long time ago, so we decided, well, maybe we should redo that. And so last year, we did something I think was actually quite much easier research. The previous research, let me tell you, was statistically significant to 95% confidence interval, so it was pretty cool. But it took a lot of work to collect all that data. This data was really easy. I looked at the Dow Jones Index for the past 10 years, and I said, what if you were to put, I'm not sure if this thing has a laser pointer, but anyway, maybe it does. I don't know, it doesn't matter. Anyway, so we put $1 in the Dow Jones Index and see what it did over 10 years. That $1 turned into $1.86. And if you put $1 in a typical energy management project, like the ones that you all do all the time, like a 5-year payback or 20% return on investment, you would have about $6. So 1 to 6 doing the work you do, or 1 to $1.86 doing the Dow Jones. How many of you can get excited about that? Okay. And I joke about this a lot in classes, like how many of you can get excited? That's kind of an unfair question to ask engineers to have emotions. So sorry about that. I might ask some other unfamiliar questions to you. So even if you took out 2008, which was kind of a bad year for the stock market, even if you took out that year and compared the last 9 years, your work in energy management would yield, $5.16, and the dollar in the Dow Jones would have only yielded $2.82. You're still beating the market 8 out of 10 years, and you should be excited. And I'm excited for you, but I don't think that engineers being conservative in the psychology of who we are, I don't think that we really leverage that. And we should be confident in what you're doing because it's really a better investment than Wall Street. And also it's less risk and it generally lasts longer. So I hope that gives you some excitement. I've been lucky to interview some other people we've had on stage. And if this is your first conference, I want to tell you we've had lots of other wonderful speakers here. Boone Pickens, Colin Powell, to Schwarzenegger, to presidents and people we can talk about, security with, Condi Rice, or people we can talk about painting and have fun. He was very educational and entertaining at the same time. But a lot of the time I'm traveling around the country or around the world doing the kinds of things you do or training and working with wonderful people and other of our great AEE instructors doing CEM type work. Sometimes we see interesting things, and I'll try to make this fun for you that some of the pictures that I've seen around the world are kind of interesting. But overall, I'm going to jump into some pretty heavy topics. And it's pretty typical for this type of keynote. When you talk about global energy trends, you might get a little bit depressed, okay? And that's okay, because depression or competition or fear of losing really inspires innovation and hope, right? And so part of this presentation will be somewhat depressing about the global climate trends, but then you'll have a chance to see how we are changing things, and I'll give you a lot of really great information that might make you excited. Again, I'm asking you to have emotion, which is difficult. So let's jump into the trends. And I'll say these are important trends because they're trends that affect all the trends. As Peggy had pointed out, if you don't have food, it's kind of hard to work. It's kind of hard to have an economy if you're having storms all the time. All of these things are really relevant to us. So let's talk about some global trends. Can I have a show of hands? How many agree there is only one planet that we are actually living on right now and kind of have a use for? So there's not really a second option. And the other thing is that this planet is limited, okay? We have limited resources, limited space, limited amounts, and we also have a limited atmosphere. And if you look at how thin the atmosphere is, and think about if you go up 10 miles into the sky, you're basically in no atmosphere, that we have a very thin shell around this planet that's very susceptible to what we do to it. And for the past couple hundred years, we've been pumping basically just take the mass of coal and things we've burned and thrown it up there, and it's causing us some problems. If you don't believe me, I'm not advocating anyone try this, but if you put your car in your garage, turn it on, it's a limited space, it's going to be a bad situation. Okay? And so we have to acknowledge some of these facts. And it is a fact that in 2018, we are in the 42nd year of consecutive warming above average. And what that looks like from a statistics standpoint is basically if you look at a bell curve of a typical year where the white might be, good days where agriculture thrives and we like it and humans thrive like the last 5,000 years. And the red is maybe some warm days and the blue is some cold days. And just since 1980, we've shifted that gradually more and more by decade to the right. And so what that looks like is, in 2004, we're basically off by a standard deviation, which is kind of a big deal. But if you look at the far right tail there, it says the extreme regions, that really red, dark red area, used to cover just 0.1% of our planet globally. But at the end of that decade, it was 10%. And if you look even more startlingly in the next decade after that, it's up to 14.5. This is an accelerating problem. And I think Bill mentioned that our energy intensity was still good, but kind of trailing off or declining. And we just need to do better. This keeps me up at night. I said this to Jordan, not with this good of a graphic or data, but I said this to Jordan and other countries, other places. It really motivates change. It motivates you to work harder. And many of our AEE countries are doing fantastic with that. But I hope this does impact you. How many of you are feeling a little depressed? Just say that with a smile. So anyway, this is a little more controversial data, but all this stuff comes from NASA and NOAA, and I'll share with you the blue and white lines are basically the correlation between CO2 and temperature. And I'll tell you, this comes not just from ice cores, but also stalactites in caves and other things. This is data that can be replicated over and over again. And just how many of you agree there's a correlation? Let's just go there first. Is there a correlation? Okay, so we have some agreement that there's correlation. And the question is, if the blue line is the CO2 and the white line's the temperature, this is what we've been doing recently, is take a look at where the blue dot is, and I think everyone's seen this in the Al Gore movies, that what will that blue line being driven up so high, what impact does that have on the white line? Probably temperatures are going to go up, and I think we're already kind of seeing that in the way that the ice is melting. This is the extent of the polar ice cap on the Arctic, which has been in steady decline, as you can see from the graph, probably before 1980. And not just that it's not out as wide as it used to be, it's that it's not as thick as it used to be. And I know this is a hard graph to see. This is some of the slides that are not in our current CEM work because it's a little bit too controversial, but it is a little bit alarming when you look at the top two lines, the blue and the purple. That's 1980 and 1990. And then you look at the bottom lines, are basically where we're at today. We've lost about half the thickness, and compounding that, half the width. So, this is kind of depressing. So what does this mean to Earthlings? You've got disruptions I'm about to talk about, but all of it really is about people. You could say it's all about love. You could say it's all kind of interconnected. It really comes down to health. We have things like, infrastructure. We have food. We have infectious diseases, and I'll be giving you even more depressing information about all this stuff too. So let's start off with temperature. So we got 224, something like that, locations set height records in 2018, and 2019 was already worse. I just don't have the data yet. So that's not good, and this summer in Europe was pretty hot, set lots of records there, very uncomfortable, people died, things like that all over the place. A lot of this energy not just affects people, but a lot of the energy goes into the ocean. And if you look at the trend of how much energy is going into the ocean, it's kind of alarming because you want that to be kind of a breathing thing, an in and out, a balancing thing. What's happening is more and more energy is getting trapped in the ocean, and the alarming piece of this is that 50% of that has happened in the last 20 years, that there's been more and more, and it's a place we've never really been with CO2, and it's a place we've never really been with heat in the ocean. And when you heat water up, it does what? It expands and also evaporates more. So today we have 4% more humidity than we had just 35 years ago, okay? That extra humidity, as you all know, because you all are CEM people, that's more enthalpy, more energy in the air, and more violent storms, and greater downpours when they actually happen. And so we have the indication of more floods, as indicated by this data, 4 times more often than we did in 1980. Major floods, major rainfall events, things like this that are happening in this country. And the funny thing about Americans, I'm an American, just so you know, I'm from California, like Peggy, I guess. I live in Kentucky, and I've lived in a lot of different places, South America, et cetera. But a lot of Americans don't see climate change every day. Where I live in Kentucky, I drive my kids to school in my fossil-fueled car. I don't really think about it or experience about it until maybe a farmer tells me they can't harvest their crop because it's been too sunny, or it's been too rainy. It rains every third day, they can't get it, and they've noticed these changes and it really affects them. And then it kind of plays, you see Homer, you see a catastrophe like this, and it's not just, the major catastrophes, but if you look at the data, the frequency of those catastrophes is staggering. Houston, for example, 9 major floods, where they used to have 3, and have had 3 1 in 500 and 2 1 in 1,000-year downpours, which now they're going to have to adjust the data, and you have all this destruction going on. So it's kind of depressing there, and it's not just infrastructure, but when floods happen, it also floods chemical areas, and spill containment systems get overrun, and all of that stuff kind of spills out also, which impacts us on a whole different way. It's not even calculated in these numbers that I'm showing you now, with $693 billion, $653 billion. It doesn't even count the long-term impacts that we have to deal with from those spills or other externalities that aren't really in the utility budget or in these calculations. So the work you do really does matter because it impacts so many other areas, and we often don't take credit for that or don't think about it because we're engineers. But as Peggy said, if you want to get into the love thing, start loving species, because there's only half of them left. In the last 40 years, we've lost half of them, and that's a big deal. If you think about not just frogs, but fish, you've got acid rain because we have more pollutants in the atmosphere raining into the ocean. The ocean's fine to take it. It's a big place for it to go. But basically, our oceans are more acidic, and so that's affecting how shells are being produced, which affects how the small fish eat, and then how the big fish eat, and this is affecting fishery decline all over the place. And of course, we see it in the animals dying off in the ocean as well, and we see it in the coral bleaching that's a big problem in Australia. I know some of us are divers, so that impacts us personally as well. And then just to top it off, tropical diseases. So we have more heat, more expansion, more pine beetles destroying things, and also lots more destruction. So anyone depressed now? Okay, so hopefully this will build some motivation. It's not just something you think about once in a while. It's like something that we live in. And to build on Peggy's talk, China about 10 years ago and was starting to take action. But this was some Chinese pictures of the phrase "choking on your own success," very well known in China. I think she alluded to that. But in 2013, they did some studies. Actually, our National Academy of Sciences did studies. And all this data, by the way, is NASA, NOAA, pretty reputable sources. So they did this study that northern China, which is 500 million people, and Beijing is in there, the lifespan is going to decline by 5 years. First time it's ever declined in our modern society. Usually lifespans get longer, et cetera. And this was one of the compelling events that caused them to change. And I can give you numbers. China spent, in that period, $275 billion, basically twice their defense budget, or the defense budget we know about, twice of it over a 5-year period to combat this issue, climate change and pollution. You like the jokes, I'm glad. So anyway, this was a very compelling event, and they created cap and trade, which she actually talked about. So they actually took action, and you're seeing the results of what they've done. So that's where I see the friendly competition coming into play, that we need to kind of up our game, not just the United States, but everywhere. Are you ready for good news? Okay, China was kind of the beginning of the good news. So we've done a lot of good things, and also other countries. If you look at the number of renewable policies, it's going up everywhere, pretty much. Not our country, but everywhere else, pretty much. Other countries are acknowledging and taking this stuff seriously. And in our country, we have done some wonderful things with renewable energy portfolios. Basically, if you're a utility, I think you all know this, that if you're in the state that's in blue, you have to present X% of your energy by that date. It has to be renewables, okay? And so that's a great thing. That's something that's driving a lot of activity, and you should be happy about this stuff because it drives projects, which drives your life, your career. I'm excited about it. I'm excited for you because all of these kinds of changes make it more difficult than the traditional system we all grew up with. If you look at investment in the renewable energy sector, since 2010, we've had more investment in renewable energy sector, and the really fascinating part about that is a lot of that is private. Most of it, 62%, something like that, is private investment since 2010. And you can just see the graphs that the generation, I think Bill talked about this as well, is more about renewables. So change is happening here and all over the world. If you look at India, coal plants have been killed, fossil fuels are going down, renewables are the green ones going up. So it's kind of an exciting time that way. Global wind capacity. Some of these curves are really fascinating and really dramatic exponentials. A lot of that is China, but globally the wind energy capacity is up. And there's a lot of other good reasons about wind. I think I have a graph on this that, wind energy, contrary to some of other energy producing generation technologies, doesn't really use a lot of water. So for places in droughts, it's very, very valuable. So U.S. wind energy capacity, not quite as exponential, but still pretty significant. And here's the water slide. In fossil fuel, where traditionally coal is 18 billion gallons of water to produce this equivalent amount of energy with practically zero in wind. Wind has its problems too, and we've joked about this. Some of the debates you'll get in your career, wind energy is bad or solar energy is bad because wind energy kills birds, right? How many of you heard that joke? Or it's not really a joke. It's not really much love for birds there. So it's kind of sad, right? But the graphic on how many, birds have been killed by wind is outnumbered by another big statistic, and that's the number of birds that are killed by cats. So, it's kind of an interesting argument that you'll hear people giving you information that's slanted, a little bit. So anyway, the water stuff's pretty interesting. I'm pretty neutral to this. I don't own any of these technologies or businesses in them other than trying to just make the change. But if you look at the solar cell industry, everyone knows this, the cost of price has just dropped dramatically in manufacturing, and in installations, of course, it's gone up all over the world. In the US, significant as well, almost exponential. So let's talk about something else that's going on that is a trend. And this is what this is about, is how these trends affect you. Global green energy purchase agreements, like places like Whole Foods Market, Apple, places like this are doing this not because they want to, but because their customers want them to. And they realize this is a critical event. If they want to be competitive, they have to have some kind of green image, okay? Many companies do this now. Many universities do this. 1,000, I haven't even checked the numbers, but 10 years ago, it was about 1,000 mayors and about 1,000 universities in this country have committed to these kinds of things, and some completely. And you'll find renewable energy in places you wouldn't expect that have, significant aesthetic architectural restraints. These building codes here are not altered very often, but they did put solar panels on their roofs, which was pretty impressive. In China, to go back to what Peggy was talking about, 44 gigawatts of solar went in just last year. And you'll see imagery like this of massive fields. You'll see this in the Middle East as well. Incredibly large solar plants actually producing energy cheaper than the fossil fuels could. So, we're talking like 2-3 cents in generation wholesale power going into the grid is pretty hard to compete with because the fuel is free, right? And we forget that often. We price solar panels as, so many dollars per watt. I'm putting solar on one of the buildings I have in Kentucky, and I'm thinking about it as how many dollars per watt, because that's the benchmark. But after I put that on, the fuel's free, and that's a big part of operational costs. So you'll see things like this in Africa and Bangladesh, places that are going pay-as-you-go solar. Innovative business models, much like mobile cell phone or mobile banking, you'll see that stuff too. And I think multiple people have said this just in solar. I think Bill said renewables versus fossil, but just in solar's beat coal since in the number of jobs since 2010. So if you have not done solar yet, and I'm not an advocate, I don't own a solar company, I'll leave that to the experts, but if you're not aware of it, the tax credit starts declining at the end of this year, so this is the time to take action now. If you get that in, you get 30%, which is like 30% on, if you can tell your spouse it's on sale, that might help you sell this thing, but it's basically like getting money back, and it declines. And the really sad part is that in 2022, which is not far away, it's going to be 10% just for commercial buildings. So, then you're kind of missing out, like a rebate. If you don't take action, you miss out forever. So these are things that might drive your projects. Again, it's all about compelling events. People don't buy because they save kilowatt hours. People because it's sexy or something's exciting. Tesla understands this. This is Tesla's new roofs, and if you've seen them, they come in, black, slate, whatever. Not blue, that's just because I've highlighted it, but they have, very, very aesthetically pleasing devices. They didn't have this in Kentucky 2 months ago when I asked for proposals, but this is the proposal for the building I have. And it's not as pretty as Tesla, but the return is about 12.5%. It's an 8-year payback in Kentucky, which is not really a very energy grid expensive place. It's about 10 cents a kilowatt hour, and not exactly the most progressive renewable policy. There is none. It's a 12.5%, return on investment on its own merits. And that's 25-year guarantee. Solar panels, if you didn't know this, produce 80% of their output. Most solar panels will do this. It's kind of industry standard. 80% of their output still after 25 years. So you buy something brand new, after 25 years, it's still kicking out 80% of the output. And I'd be happy if I could get that out of my own body. That's a great performance. Basically risk-free and low maintenance, and 12.5%. How many of you would take 12.5% for 25 years in a row? Okay. How many of you like money? I'm just curious, So, this makes sense. And then you get the tax credit and some other benefits. It's not so bad. Where I want to focus just the next 10 minutes and really, the last 10 minutes is about our world in this room is about building energy efficiency market. Is it growing? Is it expanding? And it really is. You can look at the graphics. I mean, the amount of interest in this particular field is growing. And I'm very excited. I want to acknowledge Bill and his team at AEE for really shepherding a new generation of growth. They've done a wonderful job. Let's give them a round of applause because they are enabling. They're enabling a network, a place where we can make this much better. So they're giving us the tools to succeed by putting us in touch with each other. But if you just look, I mean, just for fun, you know, I've got this keynote next month in Illinois, and if you're from Illinois, now you don't have to go, so good for you. So, but if you just look at rebates in this country and how rebates are so powerful, I'm going to zoom in on this. It's $8 a lamp rebate for a basic, you know, screw-in LED, okay? And if I go to Home Depot or Lowe's or online and look at, you know, what the price of a 2-pack LED is, it's $16, okay? So the economics works like this. You go to the store, you buy $16 to get 2 lamps, you put, you know, this lamps in your facility, so you get $16 in labor. I don't know how much it costs to screw in a light bulb. There's all kinds of jokes about that, but, you know, let's just say it's $5, right? This is pretty easy. Maybe it's 20. I don't know. It doesn't matter. But for me, it takes a couple seconds to screw in the light bulb. And I'm just saying for your house or a simple business, this is pretty straightforward. You get $16 back from the utility, and you're out $5 total to have this project. And let's just not forget about the $23 a year in savings you're going to get every year, probably for the next 5, 6, 7 years, or whenever you get tired of these lamps. This is awesome, and this is so simple. But a lot of people in this room will agree with me. You can present this, and still people do nothing, because the do nothing option doesn't have that compelling event. So that's why I showed you the slides before, so you can remind them, if it's, you know, if you can do it in a politically savvy way, you know, that there is a cost of doing nothing, right? We have to remember that, and I hope that gives you great energy moving forward. So I should say that. It's a 460% return on that investment. And I know a lot of LEDs have already been done, but just saying there's a lot of places that don't have them, including, let's not pick on this building, but the room that I was teaching in yesterday had CFL. So I'm just saying there's still a fair amount of opportunity around. Most of us in this room, if you're CEMs or if you've gone through the training, which has also been recently updated, I think is far better, it's in color, et cetera, we do talk about some of these things that, you know, we have like 4 major strategies when we do energy management. Energy conservation has been the classic one. Bill said it. The cheapest kilowatt is the one you don't, you know, actually have to make. But demand-side management is another very attractive thing, especially as our world becomes more dynamic with utility energy pricing. And this is really the trend I want you to latch onto, is that utilities are being, you know, it's awkward for me. I give keynotes for utilities, but I'm also telling them about the utility death spiral. They're in a really tough place. You know, renewables are cheaper. Their whole business model is this massive grid. It's a lot like the telecommunications industry, where everyone gets cell phones, no one wants landlines anymore. Very similar parallels there. So they're very interested in management. And so demand-side management, the last 30 years, as you all know, has been an effective strategy. But when, you know, the pricing is more dynamic, the work you do is far more valuable. And I'm just saying, we are seeing in the CEM people, the real world people, just like you that are out there doing it, a lot of them are saying the growth areas are in demand-side management and renewable energy, okay? Equipment replacement like lighting and other things, very important as well, but as far as getting your bang for your buck, these are the areas that seem to be very exciting right now. And the real linchpin there is battery storage, right? Electric battery storage is the thing that holds everything back. Solve that problem, and then, hey, you're making, you know, wind energy at night or solar in the day, store it up, use it whenever you want, problem solved, great. Because the renewable energy is intermittent, that's the big problem. But if you look at the data, and this isn't great numbers of gigawatts, but the trend is up, and anyone in this room who solves the battery storage problem, you're going to be richer than Rockefeller. So that should be good motivation. This is the linchpin that will change the entire utility industry. We're already partway there. And just last month, San Jose announced a 10 megawatt battery storage project. So you see these things starting to happen, particularly in certain places around the world, but that's pretty exciting. All the big think tanks that I work with and other instructors, this came from Rich Costello, some of this data, and finding really good resources and references for us. A lot of these publications and also conversations with people around the world are talking about things. Decarbonization, low carbon economy, and electrification are major trends coming. You know, CHP is also a trend, renewables is a trend, but decarbonization is the main goal, and electrification is one of those major trends that will impact you in your career in the next few years, for sure. Where you live has an impact on that, but basically this report here, and all the references I can give you later if you like, is saying that renewables are cheaper in a lot of places by 2030. In some places, they're cheaper already. And so that's a driver, okay? This electrification thing that I'm talking about, for many of us in this room, is counterintuitive. Natural gas has been known to be the choice source of heat for most of us. How many of you would agree with that? Okay, it's cheaper than electricity. Wayne Turner taught me and several other people about 5 times more, electricity is 5 times more expensive than gas for heating. But when you consider from a source energy standpoint, the yellow bars represent the amount of losses you have with natural gas systems, in leakages, in pilot lights burning all the time, or all that other stuff, and you look at decarbonization, that's basically wasted carbon going into the atmosphere, which is a problem. And a lot of policies are being written around decarbonization. And so you'll see comparisons where 45 or 61% drop by electrification may not seem to make sense to you, but I'm saying that's where the policy's going, because it makes sense to the bigger picture, okay? And even if I'm half wrong or they're half wrong, take 61, divide by 2, it's still significant, right? It's a big difference, and that's going to drive a trend, which is already happening. When you look at the data on the math on does it pay back, I know you can't read this, and I apologize because this is from a course slide, but this graph is lifecycle costs. If it's up, that means lifecycle cost is positive, meaning it's a good idea. If it's down, meaning negative. Most of those states had it in the up direction, taking away a 91% efficient oil burner and converting that over to more electric-driven technologies like heat pumps, et cetera. Ground source heat pumps, another idea that probably will take off a little better than it does right now. But these are things that are trends that are happening, okay? So, what I'm trying to articulate is what we're seeing is if you can use energy when energy is cheap, or I really should say power, if you can take power when power is cheap, you can save tons of money. And that's going to get even more dynamic, which is more exciting for you, okay? As the world gets more complicated, people pay more money for special services. How many of you have ever hired a lawyer before? Okay, how many of you enjoyed that? Even less response. Yeah, so you hire the lawyer not because you like the lawyer, and Tim is a lawyer, so sorry, Tim. But anyway, we all know that, and I keep announcing it. But you hire them for specialties you can't do. And I see a world where CEMs are becoming more and more valuable because this dynamic pricing thing is too complicated for a CEO to visualize. My wife is CEO of her own company, and trust me, she could care less about the energy or the power flows or anything. They're focused on their thing. It's a chance for you to do a better job of what you focus on and deliver more value. So you should be excited about all this crazy change that's going on. From a financing perspective, I'm just going to use PACE as a quick proxy to show you the market in 2010 and the market today. More states enabled, financing of energy projects, which is a really innovative idea. I want to go into it, but basically it's a way to get funding, no upfront cash to get projects done, and it's a competitive thing against states. So you can see the expansion of that. Almost $1 billion now in projects and all over the country. So very unique opportunity. Net metering is also going under a change because utilities are realizing they have to get the right price, and so they're redoing this, but still majority of states do net metering, and that is an exciting opportunity as well. I want to finish up here with a story that I've had for almost 15 years. I was somewhat involved in this, but I think it's a very inspiring story. Okay, how many of you ever heard of FritoLay? Okay, you'll probably consume FritoLay products sometime during this conference, okay? They make potato chips, and they came out with a lower fat potato chip a while back called SunChips, okay? And many of you may recognize this brand, okay? So 30% less fat was the marketing position. They kind of looked at that and said we could do more with that, and let's, in 2006, I think, they started saying, hey, what if we put solar panels on the ground right next to our Modesto factory that makes potato chips, and we make the phrase, SunChips are made from the sun, right? Really cool idea. So they did this. These are, concentrated solar, thermal, basically, heating up water, which goes into the plant and cooks the potatoes. And potato plants, Clint and I have been to a few. He's another great instructor. Potatoes use a lot of water. I mean, water is the conveyor belt of plants like this. And so lots of water, lots of energy. But they have to cook the potatoes, and this solution allowed them to turn off their boiler for that potato plant 90% of the time, okay? So pretty awesome, huge carbon footprint reduction. And people noticed. And one of the companies that noticed said, Walmart. You ever heard of them? Is anybody here? You ever heard of Walmart, right? Walmart noticed, and Walmart says, hey, we want to do more, green products. We already have, skylights and dimmable lighting fixtures, and we're doing cool things, but we want more green products in our store because we want to be better and compete against Whole Foods and other people like that. So they did this, and on paper it's about a 12-year payback after rebates, okay? 12 years on the energy side, and that's all great. And, Walmart sees this project gets done, and Walmart says, I like this. We're going to buy more potatoes from you and buy more FritoLay SunChips from you. And Walmart buys 800% more of this particular product, okay, in 1 year. 800% more. So now you got a factory that's got to run day and night on the weekends to make that volume of potatoes, and also they had to build another plant, and your whole marketing position of SunChips from the sun is now kind of getting diluted, right? This is now a corporate image crisis because they're doing well. So, what they did is they notched it up a little bit, and they put in PV, and they take all the water in the plant, and they run it through special filters that filter off the biomaterial and the potato chip, pieces and leftovers. And they filter that down. They reuse a lot more water, particularly in Modesto, California, where water is really scarce and precious. But they take the bits of potato and organic matter, and they burn it in a biomass boiler, and then recycle the waste heat. And so this is a really cool project, right? This is a project Carl Salas would get super excited about, right? This is something that you'll hear about tonight in awards, something awesome. So they do all this, and they get recognized for it, National Geographic. But the point that I wanted to make to you is that forget all this stuff right here. If you go back to this project that was a 12-year payback project, after you count the top-line profit growth of selling to Walmart and a few other people, in 1 year after taxes, this 12-year project turned into a two-month payback project. Okay? So what I'm trying to say is that we work in a world that's somewhat unsexy as far as what we do, energy management. How many of you can agree with that? Okay? A lot of agreement. So we need to focus on the really cool stuff, right? Peggy didn't talk a lot about kilowatt hours. She talked about other higher level missions, which you can enable, sustainability, et cetera. It's a tremendous opportunity for us because unlike many other fields, whether I talk about my iPhone or whatever, the more you do, the better it is for the environment. That's a really strange place to be in a capitalistic society. I mean, it's not like the more microphones someone makes, it's going to help the planet, but your stuff does, okay? And you should feel great about that. Give yourself a round of applause. So you guys are awesome, okay? So this slide just has a few good reasons on why you should do this. A quick reminder, most of the time your projects are less risk than other investments out there. Ask Samsung Galaxy 8 how that investment's working out for them, or the one that explodes on airplanes and has problems. Your projects last longer. Often your projects at 33% or higher might have greater return than an entire company, or at least a much greater return than the cost of financing, which everyone's afraid of financing costs. But if finance cost is 5% and you're making 30, who cares, right? I mean, it's a different way of thinking. There's more material that we have, we just don't have the time for it, but to talk about like how there are other non-utility benefits like the SunChips example, or even just building value. If you had this building actually be energy efficient, it would be worth more if anyone ever tried to sell it. And you can put numbers on those that are literally worth, if you save $200K, the building might be worth $1 million more. Different people will hear the benefits different, but you say, hey, we're gonna do this, it's gonna save $200K a year, or you say, hey, we're gonna do this thing, and it's gonna have our building worth $1 million more. Different buyers hear those messages and will buy more often because they'll hear the message that's more meaningful to them. But we should talk about that. We should talk about the climate and green stuff is very passionate to my heart, but it doesn't always, I don't always find agreement with people on that, and that's okay. If you can find, 3 out of 4, 5 out of 6 of the benefits that are on screen here and get your client to agree with them, you're probably going to get the project approved, okay? And that's all that matters is, because if you don't get your projects done, it doesn't save any energy, and then we're screwed, okay? And that's like the most eloquent way I can say it. So just reviewing, I hope you see we've got, I talked about a little bit depressing thing, and hopefully, how many of you feel a little bit buoyed up about some of the opportunities out there? Maybe for you, okay, awesome. There's a whole minute and a half left, but it's not too bad for an unrehearsed speech. So I will say that there are some resources I have on my company website. I think a lot of this is on the AEE website. But I've written for buildings, I've written for a lot of different publications. You can download what I call the good articles. I don't put the bad ones up there, but the good ones are available, and you can read about how energy prices beat, the Wall Street, or you can read about, the improvement or pitfalls to avoid in performance contracting or maintenance or other things that I've been passionate about in my career. And you can download that. You can connect with me on LinkedIn if you really want to. Most of the people are all energy. But thank you very much. I appreciate your time, and I hope you have a wonderful conference. So thank you.